more on barriers to iOS upgrade adoption for both users and developers, and app clips. What happened? This is Mac Voices. This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by the MacVoices Slack, available to all patrons of Mac Voices. Sign up today at patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, the Mac Voices Live panel continues our discussion of iOS upgrade percentage adoption and what some of the barriers are, some surprising barriers for developers as well as users. Then we start to talk about what happened to app clips. Where did they go? Let's go back and let the panel do the talking. Jeff, do you think one of the reasons that we see it, the rate this high, I mean, we've been talking about why it's not higher, but you think one of the reasons we see it this high is the focus on security? And every time something comes out, even though Apple doesn't specifically say a lot of times what is in the update, pretty much there's always a mention of a security fix, sometimes a little more urgent than others, but there's always a mention of a security fix.
I think the security fix part is important for a subset of Apple users.
Those users upgraded 2 months ago.
Right. Yeah. They upgraded already, and then they're staying on top of all the updates. I think it's more about it's easier finding updates for the operating system on the iPhone is more approachable for the average person, I think, and it's an easy process. And the worst part for most people is you have to wait a few minutes while the updater installs and your phone reboots before you can start texting your friends again. So it's not an intimidating thing, and it's available to everyone. Unlike some Android phones that are still constrained by whatever your carrier deems is appropriate to push out to you.
I thought this was a weird article because, it seems kind of clickbaity to me. These numbers are not from Apple. They're from some company called Mixpanel. Who the heck are they? Where do they get these numbers? They're not comparing it to they're not comparing it to iOS 15. They're comparing it to Android. I mean, what?
I didn't even read the piece. I assumed that this was a piece that was using data that Apple had provided.
Now, it says Apple hasn't released that this cycle yet.
Oh, well, then in that case, there's no number in these values at all. They're doing what Mark said, where they pull stuff out of their butt.
Yeah, I think so.
But again, I would point out that maybe this is odd for a December piece, but I can remember Tim Cook seems or Craig, they boast at WWDC about how many people have upgraded in our current. So independent of the source and independent of whether it's 69% or 73% or 63%, I think it really shows the general trend, which is that. There's a hell of a lot of value in iPhones because you can get upgraded iOS, which gives you added security when Apple comes out with it, as well as new OS features and new capabilities from app developers.
The reason why they would mention that at WWDC would be they want developers to write for these APIs. So if there's some API that's iOS 16 only, it's a new one that was introduced this year. So as a developer, I might be like, you know what? That's a nice WYSI API. But if I include that API in my app, I am now locking out any customer that is not running iOS 16. So maybe I'm like, you know what? I still want to sell to iOS 15 owners. And Apple wants you to not do that. Apple wants you to, just immediately from the first minute, toss everybody with the older operating system, over the side and go forward. And actually, that is an interesting point versus Mac versus iOS as far as this goes, because for developers, Apple makes it really hard to support older versions of iOS in a bunch of different ways. Like they come out with new versions of Xcode, and then they say you have to use this new version of Xcode to submit to the store. And of course, the store is the only way you could ship software. But then the new versions of Xcode drop support for older versions of iOS. So there are some developers are like, oh, I would like to still support iOS 12. And, maybe it's something like, maybe it's an app that, for a medical device, let's say, and they don't need whizzy new features, but they want to support every possible customer. They don't want to, if you've bought our device, we don't want to we want it to work with any phone out there, even if you're not upgrading your operating system. But Apple is, making that, I've seen, posts on developer forums like, oh, now I can't support iOS 12 anymore. Apple just won't, I can't submit an app in the store that will still do that. There can be apps in the store that did already, but they can't be changed. So, I don't know what the moral of that story is, but it is a reason for developers to, developers are sort of like herded along, like move along. It's like sheep,
Well, okay. So, Jim, I want to make sure I ask this correctly so that it comes out the way I mean it. How often do they create a new feature that prohibits you from including all the old features and just recognizing that new feature will not run on the new version of the OS?
It's not the feature when I'm talking about it's the developer tools. So every year they come out with a new version of Xcode. And then after a while, they start saying, you cannot submit an app to the App Store unless it's with the latest version of Xcode. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So if you have an app that, you wrote it in Xcode 12 and, that's fine. That supports iOS 12. And now, even if you don't do anything, you can't continue to use Xcode 12 anymore because Apple will not accept an app submitted from Xcode 12.
Okay. That's something I did not understand.
Well, it's kind of in the weeds. Why would, if you're not a developer, who cares? Although it does have this ramification that I'm talking about, that, like a developer can't go back and, they might have to do a bug, say they've got a bug fix. Well, in order to submit that bug fix, they have to, it also, from a developer's point of view, moving versions of Xcode can be a big deal, just like moving to operating systems. And that's another reason why for a developer moving to a new version of, because they don't support old versions of Xcode either, even on Mac OS, like Ventura won't run Xcode 12 anymore. So if you want to use Ventura, you've got to move up. And every time you move Xcode, that's always a major pain in the ass. Excuse me. And there's always you got to go through your code, and because Apple's changing frameworks and APIs and stuff like that. So you've got to do that. Now on the Mac OS libraries, they haven't, Xcode 14, you can still pretty much, although actually you can't go all the way back. Like I think right now you could still develop for Mac OS 10.11, but not anything older than that. And so it's further back than on the iOS side. Well, in fact, that may not be true. I'm actually doing my development on a Big Sur machine. I'm not sure if I move to Ventura, I may have to drop support for some older versions of Mac OS because I'm not sure if Xcode 14 will let me do that, whether I want to or not.
As you said, this may be a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's interesting because there's so many things go on behind the scenes that there's nobody on this panel that hasn't had somebody say that they have an older machine and they don't want to break it, so they just leave it there. And why can't my machine be supported? And these are some of the reasons that, that we don't always appreciate. It's not just the developer saying, I'm sorry, but your 10-year-old Mac is just not up to speed. Your Mac very well may be up to speed, but there are requirements Apple has that is pushing you, the developer, forward. So Mark Fuccio in our chat room has dubbed this the perfect sequel to this story. So we'll just go with it. And that is from Apple Insider. What happened to app clips?
Good question. It took a big phenomenon.
Is that still a feature?
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
I remember talking about it tons on my show, and 2020 when during the height of the pandemic, and everybody was using it, and when they got out, it's easy to use them as app clips, but then everybody just kind of just stopped using it because I never found it to be very valuable. I mean, I would go to whatever merchants that were using it, but just felt that whatever merchant I would go to, or where whatever was a food place or the retailer or whatever, it just didn't find any value to it. So it just kind of faded away. So it's interesting that Apple still supports it, actually.
It's still there. This article spawned some discussion on a developer Slack that I belong to. Mm-hmm. And, there's it's still fully supported. And some of the developers thought that, one problem was it was introduced just before the pandemic. And, this is sort of an in-person feature, like go somewhere and grab an app clip. I've seen it. Like I went to a gas station that had a thing that said, you can pay for your gas using an app clip, but it also took Apple Pay. So I just used my watch. Right. But there were some people on this developer Slack that, some people said they'd seen it in restaurants where there were app clips for the menu. So it just, I think it was unfortunate that it was introduced right before the pandemic. So that probably, in-person applications were sort of, not something that developers were, thinking about front of mind. And it never really came back. Now it's like, it's that thing from 3 years ago. Well, never mind.
Yeah. David, for those of us who have forgotten what app clips were, if we ever knew what app clips were, but since they're clearly not at top of mind, what is an app clip and why would I want to use it?
Oh, really what it does is it lets you go to a particular site. I mean, they give in the instance in the article about going to Apple Maps and example, you search for a Panera Bread, and the app clip would easily allow it to be discoverable, and allows you to go, okay, the app clip comes up in the app and in the Maps app, and then I can go to that clip and then go right over and then place my order with Panera Bread. But other vendors, like they mentioned in Starbucks in 2022, 2 years later, you aren't able to circumvent that without downloading the Starbucks app. So that just kind of is a example of a vendor like that was looking at it, but then said, it's not really worth us continuing to develop on. So we just moved on, and then. I remember gas stations, like example, ExxonMobil, or where they have the tap to pay. I've gone to ExxonMobil before to purchase gas, and it's pretty nifty. Their app itself, so you can go up to the pump and be able to just type the pump number and where you are, and it just boom, it just knows you're there, and you're able to make the payment right from your iPhone and pay for your gas. So they had the app clip at first, and then new app came out. So same thing. So I think it was kind of a interesting thing that they did by putting it in like the Maps app, because you're going to a location, making it easy to get to without having to go to the actual app, but then it ends up redirecting you there anyway. So
the idea was supposed to be that downloading an entire app is, onerous. So, one of the app examples that Apple gave was like a parking lot. Yeah. And so like, say you wanted to, a parking lot wanted to use an app, but, people might be resistant to download a whole app, and then they've got this app that they didn't want cluttering up their device. So the idea was that you could just, like there'd be a QR code, boom, and it would just download a minimum app that would be just enough to do a transaction, and then you'd throw it away. So without having to, the whole, like the idea being that an app is kind of heavy and this is a light version, throwaway version of an app. So, they did need to get buy-in from developers, which I don't think they did. Maybe they just thought, we made this available and, developers would love it. That didn't really happen. And I don't think they probably needed, and maybe this could still happen, some hero cases.
Yeah.
Like, maybe some city implements app clips for their parking meters across a big city, and then other people could look at this and go, oh yeah, this is great.
Hey, Jim, I have a question for you. So is it possible, and I'm asking because I genuinely have no idea, is it possible that part of what's going on is that some of these companies that are making their apps, they're using one of the write once deploy everywhere solutions? And if you're doing that, does that limit your ability to create these app clips?
I don't know. Certainly I would think that would have to be something that the person, the company that wrote the write once deploy would have to have implemented that feature. I don't know whether that's, something that would be hard to do in that case. But I suspect most of these, the thing is they're trying to get around, like, people have a reluctance to download an app. And I think that's true. Right. I'd be reluctant to download a whole app just to get a parking. I might be like, what, I'm going to go to that parking lot. And I'm not sure, so that's the point, but I'm not sure that they got around that. Like, people might even, I don't know what an app clip is, so I'm still going to go to the other parking lot. It's one of those things that probably takes education at different, levels. And who knows? Apple may think this is a perfectly successful feature. There may be hidden, apps out there that we're not aware of that are implementing this, and it's getting used every day. Maybe not as much as it could be, but I don't think it's costing Apple anything other than what they originally took to develop it. So, I think this is a feature that's probably not going to go away. And at some point, we may run into, oh, look, there's an app clip, and that's really what I need to do to, for whatever, I need to use the storage locker, or I need to, pay a toll, or I need to something.
This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by the MacVoices Slack, available to all patrons of Mac Voices. Sign up today at patreon.com/MacVoices. Mark?
Okay, so by analogy, I think this is a software analogy of the smart touchpad on MacBook Pros were for hardware. It's something that was interesting and didn't take off. And did it take off because it's a solution to no known problem? Did it not take off because maybe Apple didn't have enough of a team to evangelize it? Either way, we don't know. So I don't know if we've heard anything that app clips are no longer available or supported. So this article, I think, just went back and raised some attention about something that we were supposedly going to think was a great solution. Unlike David, I never ran into anything that seemed to have them. And that leads into sort of my next comment, which is, if I recall correctly, I think showed this, and his whole point was, as you're going around, your Apple will somehow pick this up. Your phone will pick it up, through Bluetooth or something. So I think it was part of a location-based service. And
I think it was usually QR codes.
Right.
Was it for Q? Okay. So
like your parking meter would have a QR code. You'd hold up the phone, and it would download this little app clip, in 10 seconds, and you pay for your parking
why
spot.
don't you be like everybody else? I have a QR code, and you take me to a website where I can use app. If they're forward thinking, I can just log in. I use Apple Pay and pay for parking. So again, it seems to me that it doesn't seem, from where I sit, it doesn't seem like it's a solution to any problem that anybody I know.
Apple doesn't want you to use a website, and I think David, you mentioned Starbucks. I think Starbucks, they want you to install their full app and keep it on the phone. That is, and Starbucks has the muscle that you probably will do that. So I think Apple's intention was for applications where people that aren't like Starbucks, that are big giants that you might keep. So I'm sure there's people that keep Starbucks on their home screen or even in their dock. But you're not going to do that.
On my home screen.
You're not going to do that for a parking lot. So this was the fact that Starbucks isn't using it, that is not surprising. It's counter to what Starbucks's goals are. But for there's a lot of applications where no one is ever going to say, oh, I want to have this app on my phone, but they still want to have the benefit of doing something through an app.
Right, like I said, it's a solution to no known problem. And one thing we haven't really gotten into is how much does it cost to develop one of these things. So as that parking lot, are you going to look at that and I can't imagine. So it's going to be some number of thousands of dollars. Do you really care? Is it really worth it to you versus, sorry guys, you just have to stick a credit card in. I mean, so I think there's really a point of diminishing value and utility on some of this. It could have been maybe really good for other things. I was constantly expecting that. It seemed to me that the WWDC announcement of it was only part one. I was always expecting something else to come back from this, but it never did. So I don't know. Maybe Apple was looking for stuff to announce that year, and these things came in.
I think the other thing that it would help with is cases where you needed an app to do something, but there wasn't enough bandwidth to actually download it. So if you're at a Starbucks, you've got the Starbucks network, you can get a full app. That's not an issue. If you're trying to do ride hailing or, pay for parking or whatever, you could be in an area where you just can't get enough bandwidth to get a full app in a timely fashion, but a little snippet of an app that might work. After the years after they've announced this, a lot of networks are a whole lot faster. That might have reduced the need a little bit, where it's just
we all have 5G, because I wasn't going to say this, but I find that unless I'm really out in the boonies somewhere where it drops down to LTE, the thought of downloading an app is not all that oppressive. There's some really huge fat overweight obese apps out there, but things that are like 30, 40, 50 megabytes, that stuff comes down pretty rapidly, so that if you really need it and you don't have it on the phone, you can get access to it, or I can get access to it.
I can't tell you the number of times I've been in the middle of a book and got to change the notes, and I don't have enough network access to get the next page. So
that just hurts.
To low bandwidth.
Yeah. Andrew,
I think this Apple Insider article is a good article. I just read it, and it's got most of the points that we've covered here.
Yeah. Andrew, you were talking about the size of app clips in the private chat. Was this a solution in search of a problem, or is it something that just because of the circumstances of when it came out and the fact that people weren't moving around, it just didn't get wide adoption?
I kind of think it was kind of the circumstances. We were all mentioning, people stopped traveling because of COVID and all that because Apple isn't the first to do this. Google had this first. They had this thing called Instant Apps or something like that, I think, where it may not have been the exact same concept, but they kind of marketed it as you can download this app instantly and try it out. And if you like it, you can download the full app. I think Apple may have thought it out a little better. But I agree with what Eric said. It was good for people with a low bandwidth situation because, as far as I know, like I mentioned, I think the absolute limit for the app clip sizes was 10 megabytes.
I think that's right.
So these were meant to be very bite-sized apps.
Right.
And that, I mean, I'm not sure I agreed with Mark's point, and he stepped away for a second. But yeah, I mean, a parking app,
parking apps are a pain in the butt.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're convenient, and there are definite advantages to them. But I'm with you, Jeff. They are a pain, especially when Town A adopts app 1 and Town B adopts app 2, and on and on. And
I have a ton of those apps on my phone.
Yeah,
and I don't want to get rid of them because it's for towns that are all around me. What if I need to park in that town again? Now I just have this stupid app that I might use in 2 years, just taking up space on my phone. And when I go to use it next time,
and updated 5 times a month.
Right? Yeah, and the next time I go to use it 18 months from now, that's been so long I have to re-log into the app. Yeah.
Well, but maybe it's time for developers and all of us to re-examine app clips. I will tell you the first thing when David said QR code, it's like, oh boy, because that,
What?
So
what's wrong with the QR code? It's just a way of typing in a URL.
Well, but the problem is that you don't know necessarily until you've scanned it where it's sending you. I mean, if you'd like to think that it's legitimate, but if it's not, if somebody came along and pasted a new QR code or modified that one, then you may be sent to someplace malicious.
You take a risk, that's for sure.
Yeah. So it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you get around that part because we've
you're going to communicate something into your phone. You're taking a risk that something might be malicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that these app clips relied on not just your generic QR code, but it was this Apple specific, probably proprietary scanning code that they relied upon for these app clips. I don't know if there's some security risk in that.
Chuck is saying, I don't want to point my phone at any QR code.
Right.
How does he know what, it's an Apple? Maybe it's not an Apple one.
That's the thing.
But it's like, well, what's it going to do? Maybe go to a website so what? If I see something, I close that panel.
Well, but I know
you better stop going to Twitter, Chuck. You might.
Again, it's a potential attack vector because you don't know what's there. You could be sending you up for a phishing attack. And it's possible. Is it likely?
Internet.
Well,
but that's the point, Jim. Is these things are possible. Are they likely? You go to a restaurant. Is it a brewery in Milwaukee? Last summer. Hat tip back to Eric. Everything there. They had no. You had to really ask for a paper menu. Everything else was all based on QR codes and things. So I thought it was a great experience. I can understand that depending on where you are, you might be in a little shady or sketchy area that you may not want to point your phone at something. So
it's all about the same thing as clicking a link on a web page.
Well, but
I
that's
know
exactly
I'm not
why.
saying I'm not saying that, but there's trustworthy and then there's sketchy web pages out there, and you get emails, and that's the greatest source of phishing attacks, right? Everyone keeps coming back to training people to be cautious on not easily gratuitously clicking on links that are coming in to spam mails, or because you just don't know where they go. So I don't think we're arguing anything different. We're just looking at it. You're saying you can't remove the risk. That's right. I agree with that entirely. But some people do want to remove the risk, and how do they do it? By adjusting their behavior so that they don't click on links, they don't scan QR codes.
I mean, there are companies out there that are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to train their employees not to click on links without doing just a little research, unless if they are quote unquote unexpected, whatever that means. I just got an alert today from HP about a printer vulnerability, and it's like, okay, I don't remember seeing this anywhere else. And so I went to the HP website and did a search on their security vulnerabilities and found it. So it was legitimate. But that's how much I've been trained, that something that came from HP logos all over the place, all the domains looked right, but it just seems strange. And so it turned out, good for me. It turned out to be legit. But I know coming out of the pandemic, I know there were not. Sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Well, I'm just, let's take a parking meter. You're either going to scan a QR code, or it's going to have some 56 character URL that you're going to type in on the keyboard. Or if they make it a tiny URL, then you're back to, I'm putting in something I don't know what it is.
Amen.
So, somehow, or you just say we don't have this functionality. I think, clicking a link on an email on my phone, it's not going to run anything. The phone is not going to run an executable. So, yeah, that's a problem on a PC, that you could click on something and it'd be an exe file that'll automatically run, although I don't think PCs will do that anymore. But it used to be that, you could click something that would actually run. But on the phone, that's, that doesn't, Apple's got it, super contained. You can't run something dangerous off a link on your phone.
Our discussion of app clips evolved into a discussion of QR codes and whether they represent a threat vector that you need to worry about. And the discussion got heated. That discussion continues next time in Mac Voices, as well as a look at, of all things, AM radio. I'm Chuck Joyner. That's all coming up next time on Mac Voices. We'll see you then. As always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.